You're listening to the ESO Network, your station for all things geek.
Hello, please let me see your ticket stubs for the double-edged double bill. This week, Stephen King has a Creepshow full of Sleepwalkers. Each week, Adam Thomas and Thomas Mariani will come to the table to discuss the randomly selected yin and yang of a double feature. Then, both will have to pick a number between 1 and 10 in order to seal their fates for the next episode. One will have 2 good movies, the other 2 bad ones. Let the chaos begin. And I am Adam Thomas, and I'm a vampire, cat, Egyptian, maybe incestuous guy. I don't know. Later on, I'll be on Charmed.
And I am Thomas Mariani, and I've told you 1,000 times, stop reading and watching this horror crap, Adam.
You know, it's probably really good advice in my case, but...
You have a problem. This is actually an intervention. You need to stop.
Oh, our guest, that's not his name. It's a group of those type of people.
Yes, it is. Our guest is Legion. He is one. He is a returning guest.
Yeah, well,
it's Christian Alvarez, right? Christian, remember Christian? Yeah. Christian, welcome back.
Yeah, Christian.
Hey, guys.
Hi.
He sounds so sweet and innocent. I can't wait for him to have a dark turn halfway through this probably massive, long, lengthy story that's going to have like really weird turns. Probably be disappointing by the ending. But Christian, welcome back. And, we invited you on to especially this particular episode because we're covering Stephen King, which we've done before on the show. We did it back in episode 12. Keep in mind, episode 141. So it's been a long time since we've done Stephen King as a topic, but I mean, it's one that we could honestly keep repeating endlessly because there's a lot of Stephen King movies. And Christian, I know you're a pretty big fan of the man, especially the adaptations of his work, yes?
Definitely. I got into Stephen King from a very young age because my parents were actually big Stephen King fans as I was growing up. So by the time I hit like middle school, I already kind of knew like who he was, and I knew that like not every movie was perfect, but he has definitely a lot of good ones, and even the bad ones, they are pretty fun for the most part.
What would you say is the first one you at least remember getting attached to when you were younger?
The first one I probably really got into was Misery, because my parents were just like, it's not too violent, and it's mainly just the language. Kathy Bates is amazing in it. James Caan, he's fantastic, and it really is a very small but very intense thriller.
I think the first one I ever saw, weirdly, was one I actually rewatched, like, as prep for this episode. I hadn't seen it in decades, probably. Was Cat's Eye? The anthology? With Drew Barrymore. Holds up a lot better than I remembered it. I had a similar thing where my dad especially loved 80s to 90s, like, Stephen King adaptations, and watched the hell out of them, and made me watch them, especially, like, some of the bad miniseries. Like, that dude fucking loves Rose Red. And I don't fucking get it. It's so boring. Yeah. It's such a boring fucking miniseries. Even at his worst, especially with some of the stories or the films eventually that would come out, there was at least some kind of like interesting premise at the core of those stories that makes them, if not like great stories overall, at least interesting ideas that I can respect, even if especially the adaptations don't do a great job with them. But what about Adam? Would you generally agree with that?
Yeah, for the most part. I mean, I'm not like a huge diehard King fan. I definitely respect the man and respect his work and sort of what he's offered to the genre as a whole. I mean, there's no question he's one of the masters. If you were to ask somebody in my family, the first one I saw was Cujo because I was scared of dogs for a while because of it. But the first one I remember seeing, well, maybe not remember seeing, but the first one I remember like taking note of, whoa, so the Stephen King guy's a big deal, was the Stand miniseries. Mm-hmm. Because it was huge, dude. It was like a huge event. And that's kind of the first time that I sort of started connecting the dots to who the guy was. And because like my parents aren't really into horror and stuff like that, but I had an uncle who really was. So he kind of like would show me some of the Stephen King stuff. So, like, that's the first time I saw all the Halloween movies and stuff like that was with him. And that's sort of where I started to piece together that the same guy did all these different wild movies.
King has had some kind of like thing being adapted either on movies or on TV, like consistently at least once a year since about like 1980. Like the first one was Carrie, and then you had like Salem's Lot in the 70s. But then really since I would say like The Shining and going forward, there was at least one King adaptation of some sort out a year. And even though like it's not always in favor, like King kind of comes in like bits and waves and stuff like that, which arguably like that especially happened like fairly recently with like 2017 between like It Chapter 1 and like the Gerald's Game movie. Like King became fashionable again. And is still at least somewhat fashionable at this point that we're recording. So I think he's a guy that still kind of pops in and out of the zeitgeist for various reasons. We're covering 2 movies here, if you don't know, at the end of our last episode, as we do with every ending of an episode, like this one we'll be doing or picking for next week. We pick movies for the next episode. So I had 2 good picks, Adam had 2 bad picks, and we ended up getting a good movie and a bad movie to cover for this particular topic of Stephen King, which our patrons over at patreon.com/GETBpod voted for. Thank you all out there, including Christian as one, as we'll probably talk about it later as well. But we ended up with our good pick is Creepshow, which was my good pick. We'll be talking about that first. And then after that, we'll be talking about Sleepwalkers, which was Adam's bad pick. And boy, we talk about Sleepwalkers.
Yeah, we'll talk about Sleepwalkers.
Boy, we'll have a few things to say about that movie, won't we?
We will. As well as our first film, which is Creepshow.
Coming soon. Jolting tales of horror. Creepshow. From the author of Carrie, The Shining, and Cujo. And the creator of Night of the Living Dead and Dawn of the Dead. Creepshow will grab you, grow on you, and give you the creeps. Creepshow, the most fun you'll ever have being scared.
So, Creepshow came out November 10th, 1982, which was written by King, the actual screenplay, and it's an anthology film, so there's about 5 different segments, though 2 of them are based on stories he wrote, like The Crate, which was the inspiration for the Crate segment, and then also Weeds, which is the inspiration for the London death of Jordy Verrill sequence. But all the other things are originally written for this particular movie. It's weird we'll be talking about this, how like both our movies technically aren't adaptations as much, because there's a lot of original content here, and Sleepwalkers, we'll mention, is like his first original screenplay. But this is based on the feel of like EC Comics, as is very much the case with the visual inspiration from director George A. Romero. And yeah, it's a bunch of different anthology segments. We'll probably go through each segment as we go along here, but just initial thoughts here. Christian, are you a fan of Creepshow?
I love Creepshow. I go back and forth with all of the King adaptations over the years, but it's probably one of my favorite Stephen King horror projects that he's done. It's like the cinematography is great, like how it captures kind of a comic book look. The cast is fantastic, and it's just such a fun ride.
Yeah, I would say so. This was definitely an early one that I watched as well. And I think it was a big reason why, as a kid, once again, this is another one my dad showed me, I probably got into both horror comedy and also just was kind of even able to embrace horror, because I was, as I think we've mentioned before, like many a horror fan, I was a little scaredy cat as a child. But I think this one was fun enough to where even the scarier stuff I had like a lot of fun embracing to this degree. And what about you, Adam? Are you a fan?
No, I think it's shit. No, of course, yeah. No, yeah. I think it's definitely one of Stephen King's best sort of projects, like Christian said, but it's also probably the movie that really sort of got me into anthologies, like trying to find as many as I can and watch them. I love the idea of a good anthology movie, especially a genre anthology that has sort of the the lighter bits mixed with the truly horrific stuff, and it kind of goes all over the place. And I think this is just a shining example of how to do that right, still to this day.
Yeah, and plus I think it also helps that King works really well with anthologies because he tends to write short stories, and also that has him avoid the usual problem he has of making a very, 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 very long story, and I would say halfway through it starts falling apart because he's not really sure how to like complete, as opposed to these individual stories are mostly, I would argue, are like pretty consistently good. I would say this is one of the few anthologies where I don't think there's a bad segment. I think there are ones that are better than others, but I don't think any of the segments necessarily bad per se.
Yeah, I agree with that absolutely. I mean, there are some that, yeah, I think there are a little bit lesser ones, but all in all, I think as a whole, it's incredibly solid.
It's definitely one that has such great shining moments, and even though it can kind of dip into a lot of the tropes of Stephen King's works, it never is really bogged down by that you see in a lot of other Stephen King adaptations.
Yeah, very true, very true. And plus it helps that it has that like EC Comics aesthetic to it. I think this is, speaking for Romero, I think this is my favorite Romero movie in terms of especially the look. I think this is one of those movies where how many different comic book adaptations we got in like the near 40 years since this movie, and none of them really capture the feel of especially this kind of era of comics it's being tribute to. And I think this is a really big reason why not too long after, like later in this decade, you would get like Tales from the Crypts being adapted, because Creepshow kind of like kicked off a lot of especially the 80s horror anthology stuff. Well, why don't we go ahead and start going into segments then here with Creepshow. Like I said, there are 5 general stories with a wraparound. We'll start with the wraparound here, I guess, briefly. That's basically involving Tom Atkins as a father who is being an abusive asshole to his son, who is played by Joe King, and the father's played by Tom Atkins. One of our faves, though, the lack of mustache is unsettling with Tom Atkins.
No. He does not look right without a mustache. Tom Atkins without a mustache, not my Tom Atkins.
I guess it helps to make him like more unlikable as a character, because like he doesn't even have the mustache to cushion the blow of being an awful piece of shit dad.
Or all the ladies he's kissing. And beers he's drinking. That's why he has that mustache.
Well, he still drinks plenty of alcohol in this. He's like has at least a fifth of scotch.
Yeah, but he's not as committed to it because he doesn't have that fucking mustache. The thing, no, I agree. I don't like him without his mustache, and I don't like him in this movie. I don't know if it's because of the lack of mustache or because of what a horrible piece of shit he is. Probably a little bit of both.
He definitely does play into the whole trope of like how Stephen King writes abusive parents and everything. Yeah. Especially like how it just starts out with him just being like he's screaming at Joe Hill to just say, I told you to stop reading this horror crap.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's mainly there just to kind of like have a nod to the fact that these comics were so controversial when they came out in the 50s. Because if you don't know like the story of Tales from the Crypt and all that, how they were originally very successful comics, and then there was like the comics code came into effect and tried to basically destroy this entire industry of like horror comics around this era because it's corrupting the children. Someone please think of the children. And I think it's mostly King kind of getting back at those people with like the entire like father character. Which I think is why I really dig this wraparound, especially even when we get to the ending and have that father get his comeuppance, and also more importantly have Tom Savini, who does like all the special effects and makeup stuff in this movie, his finest performance in the film as the one of the garbage men.
Yeah, of course.
That bit where he goes with the other guys, just like, oh, it's a comic book. It's a comic book. What? It's a comic. It's a comic book. Is like my favorite delivery. It's so good. But yeah, so let's get into then Father's Day, which is the first like official big segment. And is basically about a family who is being all together as a family of adults who always get together every Father's Day because it's meant to sort of celebrate the death of the paternal figure of this rich family, and as it turns out, this paternal figure comes back from the dead, and I would say this is, while a good segment, my least favorite of the segments.
Yeah, I think I agree with that. I think you kind of find that in most anthology movies where sort of the lead-in segment sometimes is the worst. It's either the lead-in or the middle, usually. But yeah, not to say it's just a bad segment. I think it's awesome. But yeah, I'd argue this one... I don't want to say it feels like it drags, but it definitely feels like it's even longer than the other ones. I don't know. It's too gothic horror for me. To me, the tones doesn't fit the rest of the movie so much.
I would say it's less that. It's more to me of like it's a supernatural revenge story, and I think it's a much less emotionally investing one than a later segment we'll get to. I think that's just the thing. It's just like it's a lesser version. And I think it also has a lot to do with my favorite stuff, and this is honestly earlier on with Vivica Linfors, who plays the woman who was the daughter of this patriarch, who kind of ended up murdering him on Father's Day. And I love all of like that stuff where we get the backstory, and then her visiting his grave, and the zombie coming up from the grave. But I think you lose that kind of main like through line of a character who should have kind of probably been throughout the whole segment and kind of kept you emotionally invested, because then you have the other family members who are fun, like especially obviously Ed Harris and his fucking weird dance, which is so great. His stupid weird dance he does in the middle of the segment is so fun. You lose a bit of that emotional kind of investment in kind of like somebody getting their comeuppance for doing something awful, in killing the father, even though he was an awful piece of shit as well. That kind of fits the EC Comics aesthetic. When it happens so early on, it feels like, okay, we're just kind of dwindling around for the rest of the segment, which is fun. But I still think it kind of lessens the impact of some of the scares and the gore. Would you agree with that, Christian, maybe about this being the lesser one?
Yeah, it definitely has impressive makeup and effects with the zombie makeup, but it definitely does run out of steam, especially towards the middle after Bedelia gets killed in the cemetery. Mm-hmm. It really does make me wish that she wasn't the first one to see the zombie, and she kind of lasts until the end at least. I feel like that would have made for a bit more of a better ending with the comeuppance.
Yeah, because it's comeuppance for like her niece and nephew, who really didn't like do much of anything except kind of be spoiled brats, which is kind of weird that like they end up getting the front end of the cake, which is a great image for the movie to end on. And obviously the whole recurring gag of, I want my cake, Bedelia. Like, that's interesting, that's fun as like a horror motif. Killing that character so early on is still a problem, though there's still fun stuff. Like, I especially love Carrie Nye, who ends up getting the cake death, but her kind of like droll aesthetics and just being like, oh yes, we're just waiting for Bedelia to come back, we just can't eat supper without her, like all that stuff. There's like some fun kind of like aristocratic waspy asshole character traits from these people, but I don't think it has like nearly as much of an emotional impact as the other stories managed to.
Yeah, I definitely would have liked to have seen Vivica Linfors like interact with those characters, because apparently a lot of it was improvised. So I'd like to see her as kind of the, almost kind of Katharine Hepburn-ish, like, she's just an out there rich person, like, dealing with kind of the spoiled brattedness of the niece and nephew, and, like, just everyone else, like, thumbing their noses at her as kind of the family kook.
Yeah, particularly, I love the way that she has that cigar in her mouth. And when she goes over and like has her weird rant to the gravestone, but just like, oh yes, I'm back again. He had to do all this, and like how she basically, I think, awakens the zombie with Jim Beam. Like she spills the Jim Beam, and then right afterward the zombie comes up. I'm just saying there's a direct connection. Jim Beam caused all of this.
Wait a minute. Jim Beam typically causes a lot of family problems. That son of a bitch.
Does it cause the zombie apocalypse though?
I mean, maybe it could.
It's almost like Stephen King has a bone to pick or two with alcohol, guys.
I don't know, at this point he was loving it. I think this is still like Creepshow's firmly in the alcohol's great.
Dead. He put Jim Beam in here hoping to get a fucking like a sponsorship deal. He knew what he was doing. It does grab you right away. Whether or not it starts to bog down in the middle, yeah, it does. But you are still interested in it right away. And plus Ed Harris dancing, like we said, lack of Tom Atkins mustache. Ed Harris with like more hair is disturbing too. Like I don't like Ed Harris with hair.
Well, also him playing sort of like the weird like doof husband that the one woman brings along, like which is like so weird because like this is right before like The Right Stuff. This is super early in his career, so it's before he became the most self-assured man who you would never question. It's like, oh no, Ed Harris is here. He's in charge, right? He's like the person who has everything together, and here he's a fucking doofus.
Yeah, he's either in charge or he's the bad guy. And in this, he's just a moron.
Speaking of morons, I think that's an operative point to get into our next segment, which is The Lonesome Death of Jordy Verrill, which is very notable in that it's a one-man showcase for the actor playing Jordy Verrill, who's this hick guy that discovers a meteor, which it turns out has some supernatural weed kind of effects to it. And the guy playing Jordy is Mr. Stephen King himself in his biggest acting role. He likes to make cameos in all these movies, but this is his biggest acting role. And it's a very divisive performance amongst horror fans, to say the least. I'm very curious where we kind of side on that. Adam, I have a feeling you might not be a fan of this performance.
Actually, I love this performance.
What a fucking twist.
Ooh, it's a twist. No, I think it's perfectly over the top, perfectly campy, just piss poorly acted, but with so much there's so much earnest attempt in it that it makes it charming and fun to watch. And plus the fact that it's Stephen King. Like if it was any other actor, you'd be like, oh, what the fuck are they doing? But it's Stephen King. So you're like, oh, he's trying. Look at him. Oh, he's so silly. And to me, it works. I love that. I absolutely love the tone of it. It's so dumb and so bad, but it's just fucking flawless.
You on that camp, Christian?
This might be my favorite of the segments because it is so over the top and ridiculous with Stephen King's performance. It is just such a fun time, and it feels like it's Stephen King's tribute to The Evil Dead. Like, since he just raved about that movie, his quotes are always on all of the posters for The Evil Dead. So I feel like this is just kind of him indulging in his trope of like poking fun at redneck characters, and like him kind of doing a send up to characters like isolated while they're dealing with something supernatural. Plus his daydreams about like getting money for the meteor are like the funniest fucking thing.
So fucking funny. Especially shout out to Bingo O'Malley, who's the actor that plays either his father or the doctor in those segments, especially the bit where he's like, $200 for a broken meteor, which is so funny that he thinks like the meteor being broken is going to be a hindrance to getting any money off of it. Like they're going to break it anyway too. They gotta study that shit. They're not gonna, but I agree. I think that's what works, is that like he's this lovable buffoon of a man, which I think makes him endearing in a way that like you probably wouldn't in the circumstance of like this kind of like dumb and shallow a character. But it's all because of King. King has this like weird personable energy that like it feels like it's the personification of Goofy, as in the Disney character, because it doesn't help the buck teeth kind of contribute to that. But he kind of feels like he's a human cartoon man. But at the same time, there's still enough of like an emotional investment in like, oh, this dumb hick doesn't know what's fucking happening. This is gonna like totally wreck him. And honestly, like the ending of this segment has a particularly like powerful dramatic punch I never really see coming, no matter how many times I've seen this movie, where he's just covered in the weeds and he's just like, please God, let my luck be good for once, to shoot himself. Just like, damn. That's such a dark ending for the silly bit.
Yeah, like when it makes that turn, it just gets so dark, and it's just like it ends this super lighthearted, like basically horror comedy, kind of slapsticky segment, and I feel like that's just a really good place to like kind of have it in.
Yeah, and also I do love the gradual effect of the green moss growing on him and even on the set. I think it's a great example of like the Savini's sort of like use of these gradual sort of like appliances. Almost surprises you every time you see like another bit like pop up either on him or like on the TV and all this other stuff. But yeah, I think it's a simple but efficient kind of segment that other horror anthologies especially don't ever quite sometimes manage. Like I don't feel like any of these segments are too overlong. I think this one is specifically like the perfect length.
Yeah. And you know what, Kristen? We're best friends now, because I think this is my favorite segment too.
Glad to hear it.
You're gonna say some dumb shit in a little bit, though. It's gonna change it all.
The night is young.
We'll save all of that for our second feature.
Oh, I'm sure we will. We'll get into that. But let's get into the third segment, which is Something to Tide You Over, which I would honestly say is my favorite segment. It wasn't always my favorite segment, but the more I've gone back to Creepshow, I think it's just sort of like perfectly contained, which is the story of Harry, who's played by Ted Danson, who is this guy who's having this affair with Becky, who is the wife of this rich like tycoon, played by Leslie Nielsen, who Leslie Nielsen finds out about their affair and ends up kidnapping him and forcing him to bury himself up to his neck right by the shore, just as the tide is coming in, and the supernatural kind of effect that would come to him later, but come back to bite him. And I think this segment's my favorite, I think, because it's such a like perfectly put together sort of segment, and also escalates things, I think, really well. And plus, Ted Danson's really great. Galen Ross, who plays Becky, isn't in it a lot, but I think is very good and like really upsetting to see, especially her fate when it happens. But Leslie Nielsen's MVP, especially since I think this was the first non-spoof thing I saw Leslie Nielsen, even though he's still very over the top. But he is genuinely intimidating in this segment, and I think it really works for him, especially as he's selling the threat of having Ted Danson buried with stuff like the, oh yeah, I own this beach, no one can hear you, help us, see, nobody's coming. I think he's very intimidating, but also has enough charm, especially when he's laughing by the end of the segment.
Now, this one, I like it now more than I did when I was younger. And the reason is because I could not handle fucking Frank Drebin and Sam Malone going nuts on each other like this. Like, it blew my mind when I was, but what? But why? Like, I couldn't understand, because I loved, my grandma, who I used to stay at her house almost every day after school, watched Cheers religiously. And then I've started watching the Naked Gun movies at a very young age. And so I always loved them, and they meant so much to me. So to see them in this way, dude, it just blew my little fragile mind. And so it's kind of always had this stink or stigma attached to it, which is totally ridiculous, because I'm almost 40 now. So you think I could let that shit go? But I still, like, don't drown Sam Malone. And Sam Malone, don't be a zombie and hurt Frank Drebin. Like, what? Why are we doing this, guys? You guys are both silly, wacky guys. It's just nah. For the most shallow of reasons. I'm like, I don't like this one.
This segment, I think, is really great. Like, I think it is a surprisingly very dark role for Leslie Nielsen, even though he had been a serious actor before doing, like, Airplane and the Naked Gun movies.
Right.
Other than Forbidden Planet, like, he's even more of, like, a serious character in this than even in Forbidden Planet.
The closest early role is probably Poseidon Adventure, where he plays the asshole captain who doesn't take the threat seriously of the ship capsizing.
Yeah, just the way how it turns when they become zombies, and him just laughing at the beach, just saying, I can hold my breath for a really long time. It makes for such a great supernatural comeuppance at the end.
Yeah, I think it really works. I love the look of those waterlogged zombies with like the seaweed and stuff on them. And even there's a lot of like really cool effects stuff, like Ted Danson's head inside of the tank, which is like an actual thing, like he was inside a freaking tank from like his neck up. It's such a comic book image you could only really get through such weird extremes in this particular era, where it's just like, oh crap, we have to get a shot of like a guy up to from his neck up in water. Oh, we gotta put a guy in a fish tank. That ingenuity is so interesting. And also, I think this is my favorite example of the moments where like an extreme reaction happens near the end, and there's a weird kind of like comic book backgrounds that happen with Leslie Nielsen like laughing at the end. I think works so well. And then even just I love even how simple but perfect a scare is of him going into the bathroom being like, oh, okay, it's all good, and then he turns around and they're right there. I think that's the exact perfect tone that I love about this movie, where it's like super spooky, but at the same time there's like a fun to it. It's like a haunted house kind of deal, like it's almost going through like a Halloween Horror Nights maze. Like it has that exact same kind of fun tone, but I think really works perfectly. It makes it my favorite segment.
I can't argue with that. I love the makeup design for the zombies. They're like perfect classic horror comic zombies and everything. So it is definitely a really fun, definitely a very fun segment.
No, I definitely agree with the makeup. I think the makeup's pretty solid. It does look sort of classic zombie, but there's also that perfect sort of like waterlogged wetness slime to him. It's probably my favorite makeup in the movie.
the audio that makes them sound like they're underwater, like it fits perfectly for the tone of this movie, even though it's like it's silly. It's like when like all that other bullshit, like it's silly. It almost works where it's like if there was like a word balloon, it would be like in the weird like squiggly font to indicate that they're like underwater.
Yeah, but now they just sound like they're on old-timey radio.
Do the Charleston, Leslie Nielsen.
Yes.
But let's get into another great segment, which is the crate. Which this one stars Hal Holbrook as this professor who is really good friends with Fritz Weaver, who is a fellow professor, and they're both like really chummy, and one of them works at this particular area of the university, the local university, where he finds a crate along with the janitor, and there's a monster inside that crate, and Hal Holbrook decides to take this opportunity to get some vengeance on his shrewish wife, played by Adrienne Barbeau. And I would say for a while this is my favorite segment, and I think it's my second favorite at this point, so I think this is a really like perfectly constructed segment. Though I think as I've gotten older, it does kind of have a bit of the uncomfortable, quite frankly, misogyny attached to it, of just like these two guys just like, ladies, am I right? Adrienne Barbeau is like so terrible, we gotta get rid of her. But at the same time, Barbeau like commits to this character so well. Like it's probably my favorite performance of the movie is her as this character.
Yeah, but the thing is, and I think that's kind of the point too, to where you're supposed to be like a little uncomfortable by these guys. They're pieces of shit. But I get what you're saying though. It doesn't necessarily translate to today's culture as well as it maybe did.
And they also don't get like a direct punishment. There's a hint of a punishment at the end of the segment, but they get off mostly scot-free.
Yeah, that's true. But yeah, I do agree with Adrienne Barbeau. I think, like I said, Stephen King's the wacky performance and everything, and it's my favorite, but she's absolutely sort of the best in it. And this might be my favorite Adrienne Barbeau performance, period. I'm not 100% on that. But it's really, really close. It's between this and The Fog for me.
I think it's a really fun segment. Definitely Hal Holbrook and Fritz Weaver, like you want to see them get some type of comeuppance. But yeah, Adrienne Barbeau in this, she is like a riot, just like at the party where everyone's just like all hobnobbing and acting all snooty. And then she's just slapping everyone drinking, saying, "Oh, don't call me Wilma, call me Billy," and everything. Like, she is having the time of her life in this segment, and it's incredibly fun to watch. Also, just the effect of Fluffy, the crate like monster. Just reading that, since Tom Savini wasn't familiar with how to make kind of puppet for the effect, he had to ask Rob Bottin from like John Carpenter's The Thing and The Howling on how to make this stuff, and you can definitely kind of see that that's where like Tom Savini's kind of starting to learn how to kind of up his effects game, especially for stuff like Day of the Dead.
Yeah, I think this whole movie is such a great showcase for the diverse range of Savini's like makeup and stuff. I mean, there are other ones where he's done at least like more impressive, elaborate stuff, like Day of the Dead probably is his showcase in terms of especially like gore and guts and stuff. But I think this has like so many different diverse things that he does with it, even down to Fluffy. I agree, I love the look of that creature, where he's like part Bigfoot and part monkey and part like so many other things that don't quite like, he's not like any animal that's ever existed. And I think it works really well, especially when you see him sparingly. And just the factor of this like crate being around since like the 1800s and being from the Antarctic, which you mentioned the Thing element of it, is kind of like a nod to that. And also the fact, obviously, Adrienne Barbeau at the time was married to John Carpenter. There's a lot of like familial aspects to this. But also, I just want to shout out my favorite Adrienne Barbeau line of the whole movie is definitely the bit where she's talking down to Hal Holbrook at the college, and she's like, "Your regular barnyard exhibit, sheep's eyes, chicken guts, piggy friends, and shit for brains." It's like, that's the line of the movie for me. It's so good.
I think I agree with the Tom Savini sort of statement there. This is sort of like a real good tour de force by him. Like, everything does work. You can kind of see that he's kind of pretty well versed. And believe me, as much as I love Tom Savini, he would tell you the exact same thing about this movie, to how good his work is in it.
Having talked to Tom Savini a couple times, it is 100% accurate. He earned it, but also yes.
And he'll also tell you he could fence and that he could shoot a bow and arrow real good and use a whip. And he was a Vietnam photographer. And I mean, he's Tom Savini's biggest fan, but for a reason, because he is really good. And as much as I do think Day of the Dead is probably like his tour de force, it's amazing from beginning to end as far as the effects. This one is probably the best sort of showcase of all the sort of different things he can do.
Mm-hmm. I think this one also has some of the best character bits. Like Hal Holbrook has the thing where he's like stifling laughter at a certain point when he's trying to like confess this horrible thing to Adrienne Barbeau, and she treats it just like, oh, he's an idiot. Or even Adrienne Barbeau, the bit where she's like drinking some milk and then she pours scotch into it as she's reading the letter. It's so good. Like, who drinks that? What person drinks that kind of drink? But yeah, I think this one has at least a lot of the best like sort of character beats of the segments for sure. It feels like the most at least well realized world of any of the segments.
I definitely agree with that. At the beginning of this, I said that this is a brilliant movie, and this is definitely one of the reasons why. Because even though it isn't as, over the top as the other segments, it definitely works in a lot of great ways.
Yes, but let's get to the final segment here. Probably the most infamous segment of They're Creeping Up on You, which mainly is a showcase for E.G. Marshall, great underrated character actor, who plays Upston Pratt. As you could probably tell from that name, a horrible asshole rich dude who is seen in here in his like very hermetically sealed white apartment, just firing people over the phone and being generally like shitty and very concerned about germs, who encounters some cockroaches that come into his domicile. And like I said, I think this segment is, whenever I talk about Creepshow to people, they mention this particular bit because obviously of all the cockroach stuff, which is like a very iconic image, admittingly, of the use of the cockroaches, and people obviously are so scared of bugs in general. I can see why this one definitely attracts a lot of attention, but without E.G. Marshall's perfect performance, I don't think it like works nearly as well as it does, because he's channeling some pre-Simpsons Mr. Burns energy as his asshole, and it's so good.
Definitely. He's such an unsympathetic and like he like loves being so evil over the phone. Like he finds out that his competing business partner like killed himself and he's just laughing to himself, just ready to just like relish over it. As you said, Tom, it's a perfect like precursor for Mr. Burns and The Simpsons.
Yes.
I mean, I have a real giant phobia of bugs, period. Like, I hate them. So this is the one that, even as a kid, I would skip a lot. I wouldn't even watch it. I just think it's so gross and disgusting, and obviously that's the point. So on that aspect alone, then, it's incredibly, incredibly effective. But fucking gross. But yeah, E.G. Marshall rocks the shit in this movie, and he is Mr. Burns.
It's also really interesting watching it in 2021, given he's so concerned about germs and he wears a mask at the opening of this segment and shit. You're just like, maybe Upston Pratt wasn't all wrong. Maybe he had the right, like, hygienic concerns, not human concerns. It's like if Trump actually cared about COVID, basically is what he is.
Well, yeah. I guess that's accurate.
Isn't it fun being able to make that joke without him in the White House? Isn't it great?
He's listening. He's listening to this, though.
But you can't tweet about it, can you, motherfucker? No, you can't.
Yeah, that's true.
But yeah, I also get why like the cockroach thing especially like alienates people, because of like the amount of cockroaches, again, especially like a lot of these were like shipped in from like foreign countries and stuff, and it's just like the volume of them is so like unnerving to see, because like honestly, like I've had bugs in my house and shit like that. It's like it's not something you want to see, but you imagine like, oh god, where's the source, and you find the source here.
You live in Florida. Absolutely, you've had bugs in your house. I lived down there. We had bugs and geckos and fire ants and everything fucking thing else you could think of. Yeah, no, it's gross. And the fact that they're like, they're like diplomatic cockroaches, like they're here on a mission. it's just it makes it even worse because they're really like, oh, I don't, oh, now I'm grossed out.
This was apparently the most expensive segment to film because they got like 250,000 of them too. So it's just, you definitely feel like just how overwhelming and gross it is. And especially when E.G. Marshall's body just explodes in the sea of cockroaches. It's just very effective, definitely.
Yeah, and I think this one also has some of the best, like, sort of, like, production design or even the music elements in here, with, like, the look of his apartment is, like, so phenomenal. I love how, like, completely white and stark it looks. Almost looks like it's, like, something out of 2001 in terms of how, like, clean it looks initially. And then also John Harrison, who we haven't mentioned much about. I love his score in this movie, and I think this has at least the most, like, creepy crawly stuff when, like, I think in that segment you're talking about when he ends up, like, having the cockroaches burst out, it has, like, this creepy crawly synthesizer. It's just like, oof. Oh, it fits perfectly. But yeah, it really unnerves you with that ending bit.
Definitely. Yeah. I, you know, this is one of my favorite movies, so I've read a bunch of behind the scenes stuff, hearing that, like, it was originally supposed to be, like, this super lavish apartment and everything. It's so much more effective just seeing how, like, white and kind of bare it is, because it's like from the beginning you just know that he's a little bit too obsessed with keeping everything clean, and how much that just backfires on him. And yeah, also the little shout out to the Evil Dead music playing on his jukebox at the beginning.
One thing too about the E.G. Marshall character, like, are we all in agreement? It's clearly like sort of a Howard Hughes sort of idea too.
Yeah,
like how Howard
definitely
Hughes his life. Yeah, I think that's probably sort of the main basis of the character.
Yeah, I would definitely say so.
You guys could quote me on that. I'll take that idea. That's my idea. Never been said before. So I deserve to start getting checks.
Reissue the Scream Factory Blu-ray just so we can put that quote on it. Right next to Roger Ebert's quote. But yeah, we've been talking about Creepshow for a while, and we do have a whole other movie to talk about. So Christian, go ahead and do some quick final thoughts on Creepshow.
This is probably one of the most influential movies for horror anthologies out there. It obviously inspired the Twilight Zone movie that came out a year later. It inspired Tales from the Crypt that came out at the end of the 80s. It inspired probably the movie we watched last time on the Vincent Price episode, From a Whisper to a Scream.
Classic, never forget.
And yeah, I mean, the influences on this are still felt today. The makeup is just a triumph of Tom Savini's craft. It is a good, like, middle point between Dawn of the Dead and Day of the Dead for Romero, and honestly, it's Stephen King bringing his A game to horror.
Yeah, Adam, your final thoughts on Creepshow?
Well, like I said, this is single-handedly the film that got me into horror anthologies, which is one of my favorite sort of subgenres of horror, period. It's such a huge, influential, popular film, and it's for a reason. I mean, it is that good. It's damn near a perfect movie.
Yeah, I really love it. I wish, especially in a modern comic book age, we would get more comic movies that embrace this kind of, like, silliness, even though it's not based on an actual property. I think more comics should at least embrace kind of this silly factor, this wonder, because I think it works so perfectly for that, like the transitions we can even talk about with the comic book, like, aesthetic of it. I love the look of all that and how we get from one segment to the other. And it is, I agree, it's such a great horror anthology that did kind of wreck horror anthologies for me, because you're always kind of seeking another Creepshow. You always want that. But most horror anthologies never quite had that consistency. I'd argue, like, Trick or Treat's probably the closest one to come to that. But yeah, even, like, with the other Creepshows, like Creepshow 2, there's the direct-to-video one that's pretty bad. And then there's also Tales from the Dark Side, which had, like, Romero and Stephen King kind of somewhat involved. And it's better than I think some people give it credit for. But none of them have quite ever equaled, like, what Creepshow does in terms of consistency of story and the makeup and managing to make these unlikable characters so investing and interesting. I think that's the big thing, is that even though, like, so many of these people are assholes that we talked about, they're at least still, like, fun people you want to see either have their demise or maybe even kind of almost get out of it. It's one of my favorite horror movies, and even movies in general. I love Creepshow. But before we get into our other wacky feature, here's a promo for an ESO show you can queue up right after ours.
Howdy, this is Cowboy Jim, and I'm here to talk to you about the Cigar Nerd Podcast. Nothing I like more on the old dusty trail than sitting down and listening to two good old boys who smoke cigars and talk about nerd things like movies and TVs and comic books and all that stuff. So saddle up and ride on over to CigarNerdPodcast.com. They're also on the ESO network. Yeehaw!
And now let's get into 1992's Sleepwalkers.
Charles Brady is new in town. The girls all like him. The teachers all respect him. But nobody really knows him. Like his mother.
You cannot be in love with this girl, Charles.
Behind their smile is a secret.
I don't know who you are, but I know you're not who you say you are.
Behind the secret is a hunger, and behind it all is the imagination of Stephen King. Stephen King's Sleepwalkers.
So, Sleepwalkers came out April 10th, 1992, and is the first and as of yet only original screenplay written by Stephen King for a film.
Gee, I wonder why that could be.
well, yeah, because mostly he's adapted stuff, and even like the other original screenplays he's done since have been like on TV, like either TV episodes like the miniseries he's done. But yeah, this is a Stephen King original, and I think that's pretty appropriate. Most of the Stephen King adaptations remove like the weirder things from the stories that like most people wouldn't be invested in. See it and the weird orgy sequence that is in that book. That was rightfully deleted from any adaptation. And this movie feels like it especially is like, hey, let's just have those weird bits that no one would be interested in seeing in a movie, but not have like the fun character stuff also that people like about Stephen King stories in general. But Adam, this was your pick. And what do you think of Sleepwalkers?
I think it's fucking terrible. I do think there's some fucking kind of good bits to it. Mainly Alice Krieg. She's phenomenal in it. Way over the top and everything, but I think sort of like they have to be in order to even just propel this preposterous script. But the reason I picked this movie, there's one scene that why I picked this movie. When Brian Krause is driving and they and it does the large Marge Pee Wee Herman sort of like and he transforms into the cat
with the stop motion effects. Yes,
oh, it's the funniest shit, dude. Oh my god, and the corn on the cob death. What the fuck? This movie, and of course the incest. But
yeah, I think most people who aren't aware of what Sleepwalkers is are like very confused by this right now. And briefly try and summarize the concept of Sleepwalkers, please.
That's not that easy because there are these two characters played by Brian Krause and Alice Krieg. He's like the all-American, looks like sort of like Steve Rogers after the serum, blue-eyed, blonde-haired kid. He moves into this town with his mom. And, he meets this girl and, everything's going great. Yet then you find out, like, the mom and him, they be fucking. And also, like, they're cat vampires. Like, they give you some really stupid, like, credit thing in the beginning. And then that's it. There's zero real explanation as to what the fuck is happening here.
They shape-shift into cat people, basically.
They
with, like, weird
shape-shift
faces
into cat people with weird faces, but they're super fucking horny, and it like they hate cats too.
There's some weird eternal war between them and like house cat.
That's something you want to spend 90 minutes watching. You know what I mean? Normal sized people against house cats. Great. I think I know who I picked to win, and then it's like cameo fest galore.
Yes.
And
oh god, yeah.
Really cheaply shot. Like it looks shitty. Like this is like Mick Garris. I like Mick Garris as a person. He seems like a really nice fucking guy.
Yeah, Postmortem's a great podcast. You haven't heard it, where he interviews a lot of people. He seems like a very sweet gentleman, but I don't think he's that great a director either.
Not at all. His stuff all looks super, super low budget, man. Which probably is for the most part. But there's no flair to it. It's all pretty stale. And then other than Brian Krause and Alice Krieg and a wasted Ron Perlman, no one really is good in this movie at all. Like, they're all so over the top and hammy, but not in a fun way. It's just kind of like a depressing way. Oh, and I forgot to mention, the mom is fucking her son in this movie, like, a lot.
And the son fully consents. Like, they have like.
Oh, he's totally it. They're all sweaty and rubbing each other's sweaty chests. There's a bunch of ass and snot and spit all over the place.
Well, hold on. To interrupt your horrible descriptions, Christian hasn't gotten a chance to talk.
That was incredibly accurate. That was
I'm not saying it was. I'm not saying it was inaccurate. I just said it was disgusting. Christian. For the love of God, Christian, you hadn't talked about the movie much. I know you hadn't seen this, right? Before
I had not seen this, but I will say this: this movie sucks.
Good, right? We're all in agreement on that.
I like looking at trash, and this movie is definite trash. This is probably one of my towards the bottom of my list of Stephen King adaptations. I thought the Tommyknockers was my worst, but Sleepwalkers is now lower than the Tommyknockers.
That's accurate.
I agree, it's very terrible, but it's much more watchable than some of, like, the worser Stephen King, I would argue. Like, I'm watching this, and I had never seen it before, and I can at least say, like, well, I haven't seen this before since in a movie. Go on, please. Pray tell, where are we going from here?
That's true. Like... I'll watch this over the Langoliers. Like, you know what I mean?
Very true. I don't disagree with that, but go on, Christian.
See, I relish in watching stuff like the Langoliers because there's at least one over-the-top performance, like Bronson Pinchot as Mr. Toomey. Nobody really goes over the top in this. Or I watched Dreamcatcher to get ready for this episode. At least Damian Lewis is going crazy between his English accent and his American accent. This one, I just ended up laughing at how terrible the effects look. Like, the cat people, like, when they're fully transformed into, like, their true selves, they have, like, Doctor Who alien bodies, and the heads look like the Gorn from Star Trek. And then when they're, like, midway into becoming the cat people, they look like the Who's from the Jim Carrey Grinch movie.
Oh.
In my research for this, I'm just like, how did this cost $15 million? Because this came out the same year as Army of Darkness, and Army of Darkness cost $4 million less than this movie, and is 10 times a better movie.
Are you saying that Sam Raimi's a better director than Mick Garris is? That's so
it definitely sent me down a rabbit hole, just being like, is like a producer on this like a Canon Films like money launderer that just wants to make a shitty movie to like fleece the money out of the budget or something? Because
10 million of that budget went up a bunch of people's noses. I guarantee you. There's no explanation. There's no explanation why. Within the first 5 minutes, when you see Mark Hamill, you're like, wait, what? Just the opening scene of the sheriff like turning around, it looks like an after-school special. Just the quality of the film, everything. It's so bland and dumb looking, and yet $15 million. Like, how much were those cameos? Like, how much did that cost them? Jesus Christ.
I don't think Clive Barker's asking for a lot of money to show up as a forensic scientist.
John Landis probably did, though.
He needed a lot of money for Beverly Hills Cop 3.
Yeah. I'll do it for $8 million.
But yeah, it feels like the movie's taunting us by showing better directors that could have like had good effects and like actually made the script make sense. Like Joe Dante, Toby Hooper, and everyone too.
Clive Barker would have been perfect for a story like this. With this weird supernatural sexual story. You know, like, he could have made something kind of, maybe script would have had to been fucked with, obviously. But he could have made something cool with this. Other than that, you just get, it's just, What? This movie is a conundrum. It's a question mark wrapped inside of an enigma. Like, what is this?
But, I want to at least defend one person we haven't talked about that much, but I would argue is the most consistent performer, outside maybe now Alice Krige, I agree. But I think she's in more scenes, and I think she's, like, pretty fun as sort of the love interest character. I like Mädchen Amick in this movie, who most
she's fun.
Who most would know
She's
is from
great.
Twin Peaks.
I mean-
I think, honestly, the best part of the movie is her weird intro where she's dancing to the twist. Doesn't fit in this movie, but it's like, oh god, it's like fun. It's like someone's having like some consistent joy as opposed to like, I think also a big factor. Like I agree with Alice Krige and I like Mädchen Amick. Brian Krause is fucking a wood plank in this role.
So dull, dude.
So dull.
He's so dull.
Oh,
It's
yeah.
it's like looking at drywall and thinking like, man, even if this had stucco on it, it'd be more entertaining. Like just stucco on white drywall, and he doesn't give you that. He just gives you drywall. That's not. He doesn't even have like the fucking plaster over it to hide the seams.
Yeah.
He's so boring, dude. He is so fucking boring. Like you don't care. And then when he goes for it, like when he's transforming, you're like, where was this the whole time?
Yeah.
Like that level of energy. Like I could have used that the whole time out of him, and it would have made more sense. At least you'd have had more wacky performances instead of just people that just basically look bored.
Yeah, I would say probably with him, the best bits with him are during the car chase you kind of mentioned earlier, which we haven't even mentioned this. The one cop whose partner is a cat named Clovis. He just brings his fucking cat to his highway patrol. And fucking this big car chase starts happening between him and that kid, who, by the way, Brian Krause also, he has a car that both can turn invisible and also can transform into a different car.
Yep, magic, cat magic.
They never explain it. Like they turn invisible later, but the whole transforming car doesn't make it. Unless that car is also, it's a cat car? Like, is that, is it part cat person?
Yeah, maybe it's a Trans Am with the Falcon or the Phoenix on the top. It's just some big stupid cat.
Right.
Painted,
But all the stuff with like him interacting with Clovis, particularly like when he looks over, just stop looking at me, you fucking cat. It's so fucking stupid.
It's such a dumb movie, man.
And eventually, when they have like the weekend at Bernie's with like Brian Krause's character as a full-on cat person with Mädchen Amick, like I'm just like, is the mom like trying to do like a ventriloquist type deal to make them dance together?
Right, and they also like here's a weird thing, like this movie, is it only called Sleepwalkers because of that song, which is called like Sleepwalk?
Honestly, if this was called Skinwalkers, it would have made more sense because it would have tied back into sort of like the American Indian legend and things like that of people who can transform into different animals and stuff like that. Like, I get it. Sleepwalkers, that's not scary. And yeah, it's because of the song.
Also, no one sleepwalks in the movie.
No! I mean, if they did and it was that age-old thing, like, don't wake up a sleepwalker or they'll go crazy. Like, I mean, all right, if they even alluded to something like that, nah, they don't do that either. It makes no sense.
Yeah, and since Tom brought up the Sleepwalk song, they play that song more than they play it in the movie La Bamba, where like that's at least a contemporary song for like Richie Valens. They also play like a million times throughout the movie that Enya song, Boudica or something.
Yes.
Yeah. Oh yeah. It ain't the 90s if Enya ain't involved. Oh, God.
At least watching this, I was like, okay, I am consistently entertained by like whatever you're throwing at me, including points where cats jump at Alice Krige and she like fucking snaps them in two. Basically,
Oh, it's
like
shit. Yeah.
she just does that, and the big rampage Adam was talking about, which involves like obviously the corn on the cob stab, or also her having a vase and I guess throwing it in the Ferris Bueller dad's face, which causes him to have his neck sliced. I guess, is that what he does?
Yeah, I think. I don't know. Maybe he's allergic to pottery. Who the hell knows?
And also the bit where she shoots using a regular gun she got from a cop at police cars, and immediately they explode.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. She is an excellent shot. And also, I mean, it's probably just cat people magic. Who knows? They can make Trans Ams disappear. They can make regular fucking, like, 357 Magnums, if that. They can make them have explosive bullets. Rocket bullets. Cat magic.
It's like I said, this is all the stuff from a Stephen King novel that, like, people would edit out. That people would just be like, Stephen, we're not going to have this. And we're not going to have all this weird, stupid shit in this movie.
We can't do this. Let's just make them werewolves, Stephen.
Well, except this time he's like, no, fuckers, I'm writing this shit.
I'm making what the hell I want. I'm writing this. So not only do they turn into cats, they can make cars disappear. And they're super horny for each other. You're like, what the fuck, Steven? Stop. No fucking reins, no nothing. They just let him go. And again, that's why it's never happened since. Because what is this shit? How do you sell this? Who do you take this to? I mean, the only thing you can sell it with is Stephen King wrote it. All right, cool. What's it about? Stephen King wrote it. Oh, all right. That's
you
it.
can kind of say like, oh, they're like cat werewolves. Like, oh, that sounds kind of interesting. Yeah, and that's all I'm telling you.
This is the type of shit that, like, people would pick up at Blockbuster and just be like, why the fuck did I watch this?
That's how I saw it. That's
Yeah.
100% how I saw it. I Stephen King's Sleepwalkers. I'm like, oh, what the hell? And the covers, got cats and it's a bunch of like bloody claw marks and shit. I'm like, all right, whatever. This could be cool. Man, was I wrong. This was not cool. Not cool at all. And I saw it as a young person, and even then, a lot of Freudian stuff started happening to me, and I really don't appreciate this movie for that. Look, guys. No, I don't. I don't want to get into it.
Adam, can you get into, like, those sound like the start of at least some final thoughts? Can you get into non-incest related final thoughts, please?
How do you? We're talking about this movie. Yeah, I guess the thing is, I would take this over some of his miniseries or some of his more blander films. Like, I watch Sleepwalkers over Cujo, for sure, because Sleepwalkers is just so batshit off the wall. Like, what is this here? So for that, it's not the bottom of the Stephen King list for me, just because it's such a weird curiosity of a film. I don't know who this was made for. Like, I don't understand who this was made for. Like, any of the production staff behind it, including the director, nobody can show this and be like, yeah, check this out. I did this. Like, this isn't on Mick Garris's reel that he tries to get a job with. There's no fucking way.
Or whenever he makes an appearance, just like, oh, director of, no, don't put Sleepwalkers on there. Don't do that.
Yeah. Alice Krige didn't get the Borg Queen because of this. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's such a wackadoo fucking wild movie that you kind of have to see it to believe it. What is Sleepwalkers? That's going to be my fucking new dissertation / thesis when I go back to the past.
What is Sleepwalkers? In this essay, I will.
Sleepwalkers. Essay by Adam Thomas. Featuring Mick Garris. He'd probably do it.
The foreword by Mick Garris, for sure. But Christian, your final thoughts on Sleepwalkers?
This is definitely a Stephen King train wreck that I am just fascinated by. This isn't like Rose Red, where it has such a notorious reputation for being just too long and very boring and everything. It's only 91 minutes, and you feel every 91 of those minutes just being like, what the fuck is this? Outside of Alice Krige, Matt Dynamic, and the enjoyment of seeing Ron Perlman there, like, there's nothing really here to just be like, oh, there's a really great performance or something. It's dull, the effects are laughable, and it's probably a bigger accident than a Green Goblin truck going into a gas station.
I don't know. We talked about Maximum Overdrive in the last Stephen King one. That was a pretty big mistake for a lot of reasons. And I think this one, honestly, I would never describe it as dull. I think it is so consistently batshit. It kind of fits in the same tomb of, like, Adam's almost other choice that we did, which was Dreamcatcher. Because you watch both those movies and you're just like, what? Like, I literally kept saying just what while I was watching this the other night. And I think that works for the exact length this movie is, which is like 90 minutes. They knew, like, they could not sustain any longer than that. And I think for that 90 minutes, I'm constantly just like, so incest, and like incest is like the start of it. Like that happens about 5 minutes into the movie, and it only gets wackier from there. And I think that's why I would say it's not maybe like the best like so bad it's good kind of Stephen King adaptation, but I think it fits firmly as just like a fascinating failure to watch unfold. I would definitely say that much. It's never dull. Like I said, never ever dull. I think also this was the first Mick Garris Stephen King adaptation. I think it proved that he's much more comfortable doing like miniseries like The Stand or even like Ride the Bullet or some of these other ones that are just like a bit smaller. He doesn't know how to use the budget necessarily. But yeah, at least they have like a fun friendship like him and King, and that's great. And Mick seems like an awesome guy. Mick, come on the show. We love you, Mick.
Didn't he also do the Shining miniseries too?
Yeah, I avoided that.
Yeah, pretty much. Honestly, though, pretty much any of those main sort of post-it King miniseries, Mick Garris did them for the most part.
That's
like
true,
he did
yeah.
Desperation. He did all those.
Yeah, but also this one isn't nearly as long as some of those miniseries. They're just super padded. Like a Tommy Knockers. Tommy Knockers is just like so long. It's just like, guys, this is barely like an hour's worth of story packed into 3 hours. This doesn't work. But yeah, let's go ahead and get into our feedback section now that we're done talking about the movies. Where every week we ask you on the @DEDBpod on Facebook and Twitter about, hey, what are your favorite, least favorite movies related to whatever topic that we're doing. And so we asked you all about Stephen King, and we got a couple people like James Rodriguez, who says best would be The Mist, Dr. Sleep, Stand By Me, Carrie, Gerald's Game, and Misery. Worst, It Chapter 2, and The Dark Tower. And then Brian Kane says, The Outsider is a great murder mystery miniseries. Retroactively, it has been canceled on HBO that left me thinking about it for months. And then Under the Dome was a series on CBS that adapted source material into terrible melodrama devoid of tension. Which I haven't seen those 2 series, actually. I'd heard The Outsider was pretty good. I didn't even know that was a King story, honestly.
I honestly didn't either. I did watch, I think, like the first 2 parts of Under the Dome, and I was good. I'm good on this.
Yeah.
It started strong, but it quickly fizzled.
I just remember that being like the first big project Dean Norris did post Breaking Bad.
Yeah,
and he's great at it. I
right.
mean, he's a really good character actor. It's just the rest of it sort of just fell apart around him, for sure.
But Christian, you were talking about how you watched a few King adaptations as of recent in particular. Were there any that really stood out to you as either you hadn't seen before or you still love going back to?
Oh, yeah. I watched quite a few. I watched, like, Christine, which I feel like it might not live up to, like, the level of, like, The Shining or anything like that, but it's a very solid John Carpenter movie, and it's a fun kind of King movie in kind of his 80s repertoire. The Dead Zone, the David Cronenberg one, starring Christopher Walken, I think is fantastic. Martin Sheen plays a very reminiscent political figure of modern times.
I don't know who you could be comparing him to. No.
Total piece of shit that, is thankfully gone and can't tweet about it anymore.
You heard him, Grover Cleveland. You're on notice.
I also rewatched Misery, obviously. I think that's still fantastic.
I wanted to say, though, with Misery, I recently had watched that after I'd read the book for the first time. And I think that's one of the best examples of adapting his stories, because I think Misery, the book, is a bit more kind of like cruel, and also has a lot more like sort of gore and stuff that they wisely edited out of that movie to its effect.
Definitely.
Phenomenal.
I will second that, and I will say I think Misery is sort of the best example of taking a sort of one of his smaller books, and not smaller, because I don't think you can say that.
I mean, it's
books.
like 250 pages, so that's pretty small
for him. That's
Yeah.
pretty small. King. I think it's sort of the best example. I really do, and it is anchored by just phenomenal performances, dude. Kathy Bates alone is just terrifying and amazing. But even James Caan, I mean, James Caan is a really sort of, I don't want to say hit and miss, but a dry actor. Like sometimes he's really good, other times he's kind of sleepwalking through it. And I think that's probably one of his best performances as well.
It's a movie that's also aged wonderfully because it's about like toxic fandom. It's aged very well.
Definitely, that's a movie I'm like, since Hollywood loves remaking Stephen King properties, I definitely love to see what they could do with bringing Misery back into the limelight. Reiner, I think, just did such a good job with that one. And but on the subject of Rob Reiner, directed Stephen King movies, I just watched Stand By Me before we recorded this. Out of a lot of the drama ones, obviously you have Shawshank Redemption, you have The Green Mile, which are just phenomenal movies. But Stand By Me, that one it still holds a very sentimental place in my heart.
Oh yeah, I agree. I love Stand By Me. I absolutely love it. Stand By Me was one of my favorite movies growing up as a kid for a lot of reasons. Like, it felt real, the sort of the interaction between the kids, even though it gets a little silly. Like Will Wheaton's character gets a little like silly in it, but
Yeah.
it's still it's really really fucking good. And plus a young, beautiful but terrifying Kiefer Sutherland. It's just that's a great one. But then to get onto the sort of the newer King track, we did bring up it and Gerald's Game, and then there was even 1922, and that what it is.
That one's very underrated. The best Thomas Jane performance in a long time.
Yep. And The Tall Grass isn't terrible either. It's pretty good. But I'd be remiss. I agree completely with It Chapter 2. I think that was just such a bore fest, and tonally all. That's the worst part of the book. Again, it's halfway through this giant ass tome, and he starts to lose it.
The wisest decision they made was really separating like the young and the older stories, at least, because at least
definitely.
we have Chapter 1 still works really well as like a contained story.
Oh yeah, It Chapter 1's really good, but the fucking Pet Sematary remake. Oh God, how atrocious! It is laughably bad. And it makes changes, unnecessary changes, to an already pretty good story. Actually, one of his best books.
That's my favorite of his books, yeah.
It's so fucking good.
Yeah.
The original movie's still pretty good. I mean, there's parts in it that are silly, but it holds up pretty well. But the remake, the fucking like zombie family thing they try to do, like, what are we doing here?
See, that's why I still say I think the first half of the Pet Sematary remake has like a lot of promise. I think it's the closest that like either version has gotten to getting the book pretty accurately. I think particularly Jason Clarke's a better lead than the guy from the first version.
Oh, without a doubt, yeah.
But I think it's right when we get to the point where it's him and John Lithgow, who I think is are right in the movie, the point where they go to the burial ground, the actual pet cemetery, and it's like a weird giant cliff or whatever, like giant mountain that they have to climb up. That's where I'm starting to be like, oh no, what are we doing? No.
Yeah.
Well, let's be honest. The switch, the switch to have it be oh God, I can't remember her name.
The daughter as opposed to the younger son.
Supposed to Gage is unnecessary.
It's only done so you can like have a character who speaks more and can like tell you more about like the creepy stuff, more into more like the creepy zombie kid stuff, as opposed to like what worked about Gage was that he was like a small child who could barely speak, and that makes it way worse.
Right, and it's terrifying. And yet you get this little girl who might be a good actress, I don't know, but you get her, and all you do is make her put on a creepy voice. Like, I'm gonna get you, Daddy. And you're supposed to be like, oh, this is terrifying. Like, I haven't seen that 1,000 times. It's just, that's a really, really bad one. And to second what Christian said earlier about Dreamcatcher is a fucking wild movie. Yes. I mean, Morgan Freeman's eyebrows alone. What the shit is happening here? But there's a lot of good performances in that movie, man. Like, Tom Jane's pretty good in it. Timothy Olyphant's pretty good in it, even though he's in it for a bit. Tom Sizemore's pretty good in it. Damian Lewis owns every second of screen he's on.
Particularly when he gets to do his British accent, which I love. Like, I didn't know that dude was British. I'd seen that movie before. And I just thought, like, watching Dreamcatcher, like, oh man, this guy's British accent's so bad. What are they doing? And later finding out he's British.
Like, it's so over the top. Why is he talking like that? Like, and then you find out, oh no, that's his voice. Like, oh boy. But yeah, he's really good and he's kind of creepy. I mean, let's be honest, the Duddits thing is what kills the movie. I don't even care about the shit weasels, even though they call them that, but they're kind of scary, dude. Like, the idea of that is terrifying.
Well, also we should point out it was directed by Lawrence Kasdan, written by William Goldman, like two great director, one of the best screenwriters who's ever lived.
Yeah, they're all right.
Yeah.
They're okay.
It's also like a weird grab bag of every Stephen King story. It is like it's the highlight reel of like here's a Stephen King story. Here's 15 of them.
Now, out of all right, exactly. And out of all the ones that have been done already that I would like to see get a proper fucking scary remake, even though they've tried so many times and there's so many sequels, is a proper Children of the Corn remake. I think could be good.
Because the original is such a bad movie. It's so dull.
And the sequels are so bad. And then
Yeah.
the series they did was so bad. Like, they can do it. It could be badass, but it's just they don't want to commit to it. And I get it though, because there is sort of that stigma to it because of all the sequels. Like sometimes they come back. There's like 4 of those. Like why the fuck are there 4 of these movies? But like a good Children of the Corn, that could work.
You know, in that regard, I would say I actually watched for the first time ever Needful Things.
Yeah.
And I think Needful Things is like, it's not the best or worst Stephen King movie, but I think it's the sort of definitive one in terms of this is everything good and bad about a Stephen King story.
Yes.
Because it has such a great setup. I love the first hour of that movie and the setup of like the
Max
little... Max von Sydow's great, Ed Harris is also great, J.T. Walsh is great, it's a really good, Amanda Plummer, really good cast. And then like halfway through, they just start really like shitting the bed and they don't know what to do. I've heard there's an extended version that's really good that's played on TV. It's like it adds an hour and actually feels like it's the appropriate length. But also I think that story could work so well if you like just do a newer version of it that gives the whole thing room to breathe.
Yeah, I think that could work. I think, but not like a big 3-part, like a good 2-part, 2-night sort of miniseries. I think would work.
Right, I would say that for sure. Christian, is there any in that kind of realm as well you'd like to see like a newer version of that you think could do something interesting?
Well, I'd probably say I would like to see another shot at Salem's Lot. I feel like maybe if they get the right people on it, definitely don't want them to redo it the way how they did it with Rob Lowe for 3. I'm excited to see where they could take it. I feel like, you know, with 2 of my favorite current Stephen King things, one that I just saw today, Gerald's Game and Dr. Sleep, like I would love to see what they would do if they just threw a bunch of money at Mike Flanagan to do Salem's Lot.
I don't think you even have to throw that much money at him though. Like he's proven he can do it without huge crazy budgets.
Plus I think despite how great Dr. Sleep is, like that one not being that successful probably limits his ability to do a bigger budget horror movie. But with
cut of Dr. Sleep, we got to talk about that. It's so much better. It's so much better and so much more to the movie. It makes the movie 3 hours long, which is crazy, but it's totally fucking worth it.
I think with Salem's Lot, I think the biggest mistake they made, even like the original Tobe Hooper miniseries, which I think has a lot of great highlights, it has that Stephen King miniseries problem, just like there's so much padding. Like I think it worked perfectly as like an hour and a half to 2 hour movie, as opposed to extending it to 3 hours.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that.
And just, you know what, one that I want to shout out, because I didn't watch it until recently during Halloween, one that I heard of like is sort of like the very underseen gem of his of the adaptations of his, The Night Flyer.
Yes.
Which is, it's a very hokey like idea, and it's not like the highest budget movie necessarily. But if you don't know, this is about a guy who works for sort of like a Weekly World News tabloid, played by Miguel Ferrer, who is investigating basically like this serial killer vampire who's going around like in a plane and like traveling from place to place, and like people go missing and die and all this other stuff. It's, like I said, kind of cheap, and it's not like the best movie, but Miguel Ferrer is so fucking good, as he always was, but in particular this movie.
Yeah.
He's like hard-boiled detective type energy that's so good.
Still kind of a sleaze though.
Right, yes.
You know, and no one played it better than him.
Yes.
Like, honestly.
So good. And I would also say, once we get to, like, him finding, like, the vampirism element of it, like, the last, I'd say, like, 45 minutes to a half hour, is, like, such a weird, bizarro thing, but, like, really works, and I love, like, the mythology they set up. And even the vampire looks kind of silly, but also the way they portray that character is terrifying. Yeah, the actual aspects of that vampire character are so cool. Very underrated. Would definitely recommend that one to anybody.
I'll definitely have to add that to the list.
We also talked about Creepshow for so long. The Shudder Creepshow series is really good. I'd recommend that to anybody, too. Yeah.
Shudder is basically becoming the Creepshow network.
Basically.
Y'all haven't tried the show yet. I'll have to give it a shot.
Like any anthology show, it's definitely like hits and misses with stories, but like I would say they're more hits than misses. Also, we had just a brief bit of feedback I wanted to read, just in reference to our last episode, where on Instagram I post up like the 2 different like photos from the movies we do. Reference to last week where we did the stand-up vehicles episode, and reference to Carrot Top's face. Jenny Walker said, "First time I've ever had a jump scare scrolling through Instagram." And I apologize, Jenny. I apologize you had to see that.
Yeah, well, I don't, because we had to watch the whole movie. So, she only got to see his face for 1 second. We saw the whole goddamn thing.
We saw 95 minutes of it.
Oh, God. Fuck again. Anyway.
But thank you all for all that feedback, and we also want to thank people like Chris Oliver for the intro and outro music used in our show. Listen to more of his music at chrisoliver.bandcamp.com. Thanks to Emily Scarter for the art she provided for our show, and thanks to, as I mentioned at the top of the show, our loyal Patreon supporters over at patreon.com/DEDBpod, where for just $1 a month, you all get to go ahead and partake in some fun polls we do, where you get to pick like topics like Stephen King that we're doing here, or certain specific movies we do, and even listen to at least one bonus podcast a month. We might have some little treats that we do on occasion as well, but at least one is guaranteed every month. And this month, not too long I think after this episode comes out, you'll be able to hear our audio commentary on Tron Legacy, which we'll be recording very soon. I'm very curious to have that conversation.
Yeah. The filthy ass motherfucking edgelords. You would don't listen to that shit. And you get to hear Thomas try to fucking flay me alive over it, but I will stand strong. I will hold my post.
I think it'll be a very interesting conversation. I'm very sure of that.
It's not going to be that interesting. It's just going to be you being like, see, I don't understand the actual aesthetic choice behind this. So to me, it's reminiscent of like, it's fucking cool.
That for 2 hours, basically. Yeah. Maybe. But you can listen to all of that if you're, like, as I mentioned, an edgelord patron for just $1, like Christian. We thank you for being a patron. Of course, we also thank you for just being on the show.
Well, thank you for having me, Tom. I am a Patreon edgelord, and since you guys have kind of gotten me on a Stephen King kick, I'm actually planning this weekend to listening to your Shining commentary.
Oh, yes, we did that as well. If you want more Stephen King talk, we did a whole commentary on the Stanley Kubrick film with The Shining. That was our last one. Yeah, thank you, Christian, for that plug. We're not going to give you back your $1 for that.
Give us more dollars. You're going to say content, but just give us more dollars.
I actually did by going to the TeePublic store and getting myself a double-edged double bill shirt as well.
Look at this fucking guy.
Christian, wait, you went to TeePublic store, over to the ESO network specifically store, and bought a t-shirt, or you could also buy a mug or a face mask maybe. Christian, that's so great. Maybe other people should do that. You're pleased with the product, right?
Yes, it's a great shirt. I like wearing it to the gym and everything. I always love listening to your show there, and I love to give you guys support any way I can.
Thanks for also not giving back your $1 for promoting the story.
Yeah. We're keeping that $1. But thank you so much for all the support.
I am happy to provide it for what you guys do.
It all goes up my nose, much like the budget of Sleepwalkers.
For sure. But we ain't getting $15 million yet. Please, get us there. But for more of our silly antics, you can find us on Twitter and Facebook at DEDBpod. That's where you post up the feelers and stuff, asking you, hey, what are your favorite and least favorite ones related to the topic that we do. And also you can send us feedback, doubleedgedoublebill@gmail.com, all spelled out. And you can find me also on Twitter and Instagram or Letterboxd as @NotTheWho'sTommy, where I post my musings on movies and other things. And also I do some writing at marianithomas.wordpress.com, which, as we're recording this episode, earlier in the day, I released my top 20 films of 2020 list. And you can go ahead and peruse that, see what I ranked pretty highly, and also where you can stream many of those choices, given 2020 was the year of we're stuck inside, let's stream some movies.
Find me on Twitter or Instagram at Atom or Adam, that's ATOM _ ADAM. I mostly just post paintings or just random bullshit at 3 o'clock in the morning. But yeah, find me on there. I'll share your stuff. I'll do whatever you need. You know what? I'll dance for them dollars. Christian, I'm going to dance for your dollar, baby.
As Tom has said in the previous Stephen King episode, dance, puppet, dance.
Oh, well, that's a deep cut. And for more deep cuts, you can subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, and other podcasting platforms. If you're listening on the ESO network, why not dig into the archives of both the various other great shows on the network and also even ours over at Podbean, where like there were 70 or so episodes we did before we joined ESO. And if you want to, you can't buy something at the store or contribute to the Patreon, we would appreciate if you just rate, reviewed, or share the show around to give us more visibility, because that's absolutely free, baby.
100% free, baby. And by the way, too, we don't mention it enough, but we are on Spotify. You know what I mean? Spotify. Everybody's got Spotify.
I mentioned at the end of every episode, I mentioned Spotify.
I'm not going to lie. Yeah, but I'm saying it again to make it more real. Because everyone thinks Thomas is a liar.
That's true. It's just full of lies. Nothing but lies.
Full of lies. He's a bag of lies.
Yes, but I won't be lying when I say we got to do our picking for next week's topic. And this is a bit of a somber note, just because we realized in terms of the timing of things, we'll be releasing next week's episode on an unfortunate anniversary of the 7th anniversary when we lost a great actor who we haven't talked enough about on the show, so we decided, let's do a whole episode about him. We're going to be doing a Philip Seymour Hoffman episode, which I'm very excited to do.
Oh, me too, man. He's so good. One of my favorite character actors ever.
Do you have the 2 good movies for this particular topic?
Sir.
I have the 2 bad ones. We've assigned numbers between 1 and 10 for each of those. And, the way we do this is someone will pick numbers between 1 and 10 for your 2 good choices and my 2 bad. Usually we do that for each other's choices, but we have a guest like Christian. They get to do that here. So, Christian, for Adam's 2 good choices, a number between 1 and 10.
All right. I'm going to go with number 8.
All right. At number 9, I have, which not necessarily a Philip Seymour Hoffman starring vehicle, but he's one of the main side characters in it. And Thomas and I have talked about this movie here and there. It's one of my favorite movies, maybe ever. I have Spike Lee's 25th Hour.
Oh my fucking god! Oh, I'm so happy. I didn't expect this. I'm so happy.
Fucking movie so much.
Such a great movie.
It's so good.
Oh, I'm so happy. One of my favorite movies.
At number 1, I had The Master, which I think is also a pretty good Philip Seymour Hoffman performance.
Phenomenal performance. Yeah, great. I'm very ecstatic. I can't wait to talk about 25th Hour. It's so good. But
good.
For my 2 bad choices, Christian, number between 1 and 10.
For you, I'm going to go with number 3.
Okay, now, at number 2, I have a movie that I know a lot of people have affection for, and I have some affection for it as well. But it's kind of a dumb, fun, bad movie. But one I would love it. I can't wait to talk about on the show either. I have the Bill Paxton, Helen Hunt starring Twister.
That's a good choice. It's a stupid fucking movie, but it's super fun.
Yeah,
that's a fun one.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Yes. And then at number 9, I had one that it's a pretty bad typical romantic comedy, but he's pulling some Jack Black energy in it. I have Along Came Polly.
He's the only good part of that whole movie.
He has one of my favorite pratfalls ever in a movie. In that movie, though.
Yep.
There's where he just like fucking falls on his ass, and he's so good.
Might be the first time I ever heard the term "sharded" too. Might have been in that movie.
That's true. From Philip Seymour Hoffman, Academy Award winning.
Yep.
Like the next year after that movie, he won for Capote, I believe.
Yeah. Yes.
But yeah, that'll be very fun to get into. But until next time, good night, kiddies.
Yeah. Bye.
Not the creepiest thing about either of the movies that we covered. The Creepshow, the movie called Creepshow, is less creepy than Sleepwalkers is.
Yeah, for sure.
100% the case. Good night.
Bye.
This has been a broadcast of the ESO Network. Be part of the crew and help support our shows by donating to our ESO Patreon or by shopping at the TeePublic store, which can all be found at www.esonetwork.com. The ESO Network, your station for all things geek.